Today's question is simple. Has social media made dating better or worse? Let me know in the comments before you've even listened to this episode. Are dating standards becoming unrealistic because of social media? Do you think that everything that we're getting through now, especially if you're looking to date, your algorithms will pick up, that you're looking at men or you're looking at women, whichever your preference may be, and then you'll start getting fed more of that. Now, lots of these, the guys and the women, they're good looking people in great shape and, uh, using social media as a platform for health and fitness or to boost their followers or their reach and then use that to either promote products or promote themselves, whichever it may be. But because we're seeing so many of these and they're becoming so they're like the norm, if you like, where with my algorithm, my feed that comes up, it's because I follow a lot of dating and I'm interested in different things. It's a lot of women talking about dating in midlife, and these are mostly really good looking women and they're working out all the time and they're showing their workouts. And is that representative of the dating pool though? Because when you go on to dating websites, you're not surrounded by that choice. Because one, obviously it's location and where you're looking, and it's always about the people that are single in your area or coming up near you, or in most dating apps situation, probably 3, 4 hours away. But do we then think that that's what we're striving for? That's the norm. How do we judge where we are within this sort of dating regime of, are our expectations sometimes unrealistic because of what we're shown or what we're used to seeing all of the time? Do the dating apps then, in turn, make us too picky? Because when you're on dating apps, you'll be able to swipe and swipe and swipe and swipe, and you'll occasionally get the same people coming out again. But lots of the time, you'll just be fed more and more people all the time, and it's very addictive, and it's very addictive to sort of have one more swipe. You don't get that choice so much when you're out in a bar or out in wherever it may be, because a lot of it you feel like it's chance. How often have we met people and gone, God, I nearly didn't go out tonight, and they go, oh, neither did I, and I was meant to be going somewhere else. And then you almost convince yourself that your meeting was, aligned in the stars and this was meant to be, and that's why you've met, which of course could be the case. But you haven't got that constant choice, because if you were, let's say, out and this happened where you were speaking to someone and they said, I wasn't going to come here tonight, I was going to do something else. And then all of a sudden another person came over that you had the same story with. Like, well, I wasn't going to come out. Then you start to get more choice. And that's more realistic of a dating app where you've got this opportunity to come across whoever it may be and read their profile, look at their pictures and think, I'm quite attracted by them. They're quite attractive. But in 2 seconds, it's like, yeah, but there might be someone else. And what you have to do on the dating apps as well is you have to, or you used to have to do this, you have to kind of like someone to be able to swipe to more people, because if you didn't like them and you swiped again, it was sometimes very difficult to find that person again. And you think, oh, I should have swiped on them, and I should have just sent them a message or whatever it may be, because otherwise they'll be lost in that sort of never-ending reel of people that comes across dating sites, where you can just keep flicking, 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 and you convince yourself there's always something better. That there can always be something else, and then when you want to go back to what you had, it's very difficult to do that. So I think it's through social media where we become, almost our expectations are unrealistic, that we're going to find, this hunky guy that chops wood every day in the garden, or this great looking girl that, does all the housework in a skimpy pair of shorts. It's not always the case. Is there always the feeling that that person in your head is one swipe away? Now, I've got better at as I've got older, because I think when we're younger, and definitely me, I think I was very always looked at people through this window, and I thought, she's stunning. She's beautiful. She's really funny. She's all of those things because I was seeing that person in a brief moment. That's what that person was to me. They were a brief moment, but I thought I knew the whole of them because of that brief moment. So you go out with them, you date them, and then you find that after a while that window that you saw was just that. It was a really small window of what you thought that person was, but it didn't represent that person completely. It just represented them for a brief moment. And I've found that recently within the last few years as well, that I met someone and I thought, I saw a glimpse of who I thought they were, and I thought, God, if they're more like that, that's great. She's going to be really good for me. Later on, I found out that brief moment. That's all it ever was. It was a brief moment. That was a small glimpse at that person, and it wasn't the whole of the person. And I think that's in social media. Let's take the hunky guy with the long flowing hair and the beads of sweat dropping off of him while he chops wood. You know, in that moment, you're looking through that window and thinking, he's really hot. That guy's really hot. But then the guy comes in, takes off his shoes, throws them in the corner, and doesn't pick them up, drops his socks, drops his pants, which could be a good or a bad thing for you, obviously, but then leaves those going around, goes and makes a cup of tea, stirs it way too hard, so tea overflows from the cup and leaves all the side, doesn't bother washing it up. He goes and sits down, drinks his tea, leaves the cup there, goes upstairs, has a shower, which again, you could be thinking, well, that bit sounds really good. Finishes his shower, leaves a wet towel on the bed, has shampoo everywhere, rubs the mirror because it's steamed up with his hand, and then doesn't wipe it. All of these things. That is the whole person, but we don't see these in that glimpse, that little window. We just get a brief moment of a person. So as I've got older, I tell myself that a lot more. That I can see someone out in the street and think they're a really attractive person. But then I think they're attractive in this brief moment where you could be with someone that is fantastic all the time. And you think, yeah, I can see that in a brief moment, but I'm no longer at a stage in my life where I'm willing to gamble what I've got for something that I'm seeing 2 or 3 seconds of. And it's a great thing because if you think like that, things like habits can be very off putting about certain people. Now, that could be a habit of biting your nails, swearing too much, smoking, whatever it may be, a strange laugh, a voice. And we've said this in previous podcasts, but you don't know a lot of those things until you actually get underneath the skin of a person or into a person or 2 or 3 weeks into that person before you start finding these things out. And then gradually those things do start to become really annoying. And they're the things that make us either continually fall for someone or just stops us in our tracks, and you start going the other way of thinking, all I see now is these bad habits. I don't see the chopping wood bit anymore. Now when I look through that window and I see him out there chopping the wood, it annoys me because I know he's going to take his boots off and throw them down there and then do the thing with the tea and then with the towel, and I'm done with all this. I want someone who's more in line with my values. So I think that can help us if when you're doing these dating things. But of course, on dating sites, all you're given is small windows. It's that's all you know is small windows on dating sites because you've actually then got to meet the person to find out more about this picture. And I think that's the great thing about meeting people organically is that when you meet people organically, it just allows you to see through the window more because you get to see them in person, you get to hear the voice, see if they've got any habits that you might find annoying. You'll see if they smoke or see if they're tall, they're short, whatever it may be, that what they look like without sunglasses. So you get to experience all these things firsthand. So although you're seeing through the window, you're seeing it for longer and you're seeing it firsthand. And there's not many ways that you can get past that with dating apps, really. You've got to find these things out for yourself, I think. So our next question is there really a second chance of love after 40? My initial thought would be, I think there's a second, third, fourth, fifth chance of love. at any age. It depends upon your energy levels and whether you want to look for it, find it, and work at it, I guess, because relationships are work. And I don't mean that by, I don't think relationships should be hard work. I think there's a difference. Digging a hole, that's hard work and it's graft. And at the end of it, you'll have a hole. I think relationships are work, but it shouldn't be exhausting work. It just should be something that you're wary of and you're aware of rather than wary, I should say. Something where you consider the other person and you start getting used to thinking not just of yourself anymore, but how this might look to someone else. And it could be something as simple as like, well, I've always done this and I've always done that. And then when you're with someone else, it's like, yeah, I know you've always done that, but you might need to rethink and give me a bit of time as well. Because I don't want to stop you doing all the things that you love doing, but we need to have a conversation around how that works for both of us. And it depends upon also, do people still want to fall in love? Because some people don't. And I think when we say 40, I think we used to say 40 like everyone thought it was a really old age. I think 40 now is still incredibly young. I really do. It's I think people used to look at 40 and think, well, most people are dying at 65, 70. So 40, you're more than halfway there. So what else? Where now, I don't think that's the case. Women are starting to more and more still have children in their 40s. I think having kids at 40 for a guy is a great age to be having kids with because you've got out your system a lot of the things that you wanted to get out of your system in your sort of 20s and especially your 30s as well for guys, because I thought my 30s were fantastic. I loved my 30s, and especially sort of 34, 35, because you know yourself a lot better in your 35s and upwards, and you start to get a confidence with yourself as well, which is just knowing, silly things about, what you're about, what your morals are, what your dress sense is, and what your conversation is about, and which girls you're going to get on with and which girls you're not. And you start to see those signs a lot earlier. And you'll see those signs and thinking, okay, I know this is not going to be a long term thing, but it could be fun for the short time. And that could be the same as women, I'm guessing, in their 30s. Obviously, with women, there is always that maternal clock that is ticking, that they're thinking, right, well, I'm going to need kids. I'm going to want to have kids before I'm 30 because I don't want to be exhausted in my like late 30s with newborns. However, I think where that does affect women is that the men that they choose to have kids with in their like sort of mid to late 20s, they might not be the guys in their 40s that they still want to be with. And they might, in their 30s and 40s, when they start to, in the same way, coming to their own and think, I know myself better now. I understand what I want. And this guy was great to have kids with, but he's not what I want going forward for my 40s. So I think there's been a big shift in that as well, where sometimes people are choosing partners to have kids and they're choosing partners after that time to have relationships with for them. And I think that's very different. And also, sometimes people choose partners for financial reasons. They think, I'm going to have a great life with this person. So that's going to be great. But after they've been living in the big house for the last 10, 15 years, they might start to realize that it's a big house, but I'm on my own. I saw myself sharing this with someone, and I don't need a big house. I don't need those things. I want someone that's going to give me time, and I want someone that's going to make me laugh now, and I want someone that's going to show attention to me and be attracted by me. And maybe those things can get lost in the process of bringing up kids and doing all the nuts and bolts of a relationship, which we spoke about in the last question. So I think, yes, of course, there is a chance of love, but it also depends what people want. So many of the feedback we've had from a lot of the posts recently is people just want companionship. Now, to me, companionship's not love. Companionship is like a dog or a cat. That's companionship. And again, lots of people do seem to be settling for that companionship because they're like, I'm fine with my dog, I'm fine with my cat. I don't need a guy. I'm getting all the love that I want from this furry little thing. Whereas, love is about that fairy tale for me, is about, feeling that you care about someone, feeling that you want to do things with someone, looking forward to seeing them if you haven't seen them, and, sharing all those moments. And for me, love has always been about constantly falling. I don't really want to get to that point of where you go, right, I'm in love with this person, I've arrived, that's it. Because then you think, what else now? If you're not going to love them anymore, you're not finding anything new about them, where do you go from here? Does it just get stale? Do you just go, well, I've arrived now, here I am, I'm at love, that's me done? And like, you mentally maybe then check out, and then that's when the other person can start feeling like maybe they're getting neglected a little bit, because you've taken it for granted for all those things that you did at the beginning to get that person in the first place. You've now thinking, well, I've got that person now. Here they are. I'm just going to carry on doing the same things that I've always done. And then that person might, then start to pull away from you because they're now looking for more things. So, in terms of, is there a chance of love? Completely. I think there's a chance of love at any age if you've got the energy to look for it, and if that's something that you still want. Do you still want love at an older age? Or is what you're looking for now not love? What you're looking for now is companionship, someone to rely on, someone that may give you compliments, someone that may do jobs for you. But then I think you're not looking for love then. You're looking for a handyman that can tell you look great and take you out with dinner. Like, you can do that with another woman, or another guy. And is that why women now are finding that when they're older, they're like, I don't really need a man. If my sexual appetite is no longer that where I crave a man for that physical attraction or that physical love or the sex, all the things I'm looking for, I can get from a friend. She's going to tell me I look nice. She's going to tell me that, she can help with jobs. And, she's going to tell me that she can come out to the cinema, the pictures, whatever it may be. So I think a lot of this is not the question of, is there a chance of you finding love in midlife? The question is, do you actually want love at midlife? Or do you just want a companion? And does that companion need to be a man? And then that's maybe why men are looking at younger women, because they do still want to have a sex life and a physical relationship with someone. And that's if the guy's in their 50s and their 60s. And if women don't want that, that may be where the mismatch is. Now, I know that's not all women. Lots of women are still sexually active in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they might still be looking for those guys are that well as well. But I guess it's about knowing what you want, knowing what interests you at your stage of life, but as I said, to me, 40 is so young still. God, of course you should be looking at a second chance, third chance, fourth chance, fifth chance, whatever it may be, at love. But understand what, love is about and what love means to you, I should say, because your version of love might be different to mine. It might be different to the person that you're looking at. And I think it's about finding someone that aligns with your version of what love is. So, our next question that we're going to talk about today is, should couples split finances 50-50, or should it depend upon the person's income? Now, if you've been in long relationships, there's probably you've reached where you've just gone along with it, I guess. I haven't had that many what I would call really long relationships. So my knowledge of this, probably I've only had a couple of times. But looking at people that have been married for a long time, it will be usually the person that earns the money. But, is the days of having joint bank accounts still relevant? We've spoken on recent podcasts about the trad wife now, the traditional housewives, as it were, where more women apparently are embracing this after women have fought for so long for equality and financial independence of their own, because they're now getting out there, getting jobs. So let's say if one of you is earning a lot more money than the other person, how does that work? What's fair? What should be fair in a relationship? Now, for me, I think this is totally dependent on the two people that are involved. If one of you is earning loads more money than the other person, then it's all relative. That person is going to be able to afford more and do more. And it depends, what you're quantifying in terms of, what you bring to the relationship, I guess, because some people are very generous with money. Some people are very generous with time, and some people are generous with both. Sometimes, a person will go out of their way for you and come and pick you up and do anything that you ask them to do, and they'll be generous with their time in other ways, where some people see generosity just as a financial thing. They're the ones that are always paying for everything. So it's about what you both bring to the relationship, I think. And it's about what you've established beforehand as well. I think if you had two people now that were a man and a woman, or a man and a man, woman and a woman, whichever way that you want to look at it, that were both working and they're both earning good money, then you need to sit down, I think, and have a conversation with how it's going to look if you get married. Are you both going to continue to work? Now, obviously, for the woman, it's the only person that can childbear. So they'll have to have some time off of work, obviously, but they might want to go straight back to work straight away. And they might be of the opinion, no, I want to be out there. I've worked hard for my career. I'm going straight back to work. So then they might decide that the guy is going to stay at home, be a trad husband, I guess, if that's what you might call it, and do all those jobs. But whichever way around it may be, I think you need to sit down and work out, how you're going to do that before it goes on, so everyone knows what's going on. If one of you is like, no, I think it's really important to have one of us at home. I think then it's like, okay, but be aware that you're giving up your career, that you might not be able to start again in 10, 12 years, whatever it may be. Whether you have a time lapse on it in terms of like, okay, we'll do that, but just do it for 2 years until they start school, 4 years, obviously. So they start school and then go back into your career again. But in the meantime, you've got to keep updated with this. I think it's about setting the boundaries and setting the expectations as well, because speaking to a lot of people that are stay-at-home parents, I think the other person out working thinks it's all about, going out for lunches and having long breakfasts and, going to the gym and doing all these things. So they don't actually know what's involved in bringing up children at home. And, whether you're bringing up one or whether you're bringing up four, there's a massive difference in that as well. I've just always had one child. And when I speak to people that have had two or three, I see a very different side and they tell me a very different thing as well. It's a kind of, you've just had one, one's easy, wait till you got two or you got three and you times what you're doing by four, where you're just running around for one kid. You want to be running around for four kids. It's exhausting. So I do think it depends upon what your situation is. But I think what you need to be careful of within these situations is the resentment. I think if everything's laid out to start with, and that can be an awkward situation at the beginning of a relationship, I guess, where you go, okay, so what are you bringing to the table? What am I bringing to the table? What are we doing about finances? Are we both having our own accounts, but having a joint account that covers all the bills and everything else? And then we just take everything out of there. Or if one of you is staying at home, what's that going to be worth? Because the other person is still earning their money. But, what's that going to be worth? And are you giving me half of what you're earning? Or are you just taking care of all of the bills, but then you're earning more and more money and I'm earning nothing? So I think they're difficult conversations, but I think in the event of anything going wrong or to prevent further arguments in the future or resentment from the person who's out working all the time or from the person that's staying at home all the time, you've got something that you can refer to going, hold on, we didn't agree that in the beginning. But maybe a lot of married people for a long time, you might be there and saying, it doesn't work like that. It's got to be something fluid. You can, because it changes, things change quickly. So you can't have it that structured. But I would have thought it would have been a lot easier with some structure in place to begin with, because without that structure, everyone's always going to think their own time is more valuable than the other person's time, or that there's no appreciation of what the person at work is doing. I've listened to many married arguments over my time with people where they're like, "Yeah, but you're out with clients all the time. You're having a great time. You're off at the football. You're at the rugby. You're at the Grand Prix. You're doing all this, and that's brilliant for you." And then the other person would be like, "Yeah, you think that's fun. It looks fun, but it's not. I'm out with complete sort of people that I don't have anything to do, like, get in common with. And I've got to laugh at all their stupid jokes. And I've got to stay out till 4 o'clock in the morning with them drinking when I don't want to be. And that's hard work. It's okay for you. You're at home with the kids. You're getting to sort of watch the kids grow up and go to bed at a normal time. And then the wife will be, or the husband will be like, no, no, no. I'm not going to bed at a normal time because I've got to clear up everyone else's mess and I've got to cook 3 different dinners at 3 different times, pick so and so up from here, go and get this one and drop them off. So it's about having that appreciation of what the other is doing, I guess, and what that entails. And maybe sometimes people don't know that going into it. But I think if you have something down to begin with, surely that's got to be easier, especially in the event of a disagreement, because it gives you a starting point. And does equality always mean equal money? With women who have been fighting for, and rightfully so, for equality for so long, and getting somewhere near where that's achieved now, does that mean equal in everything, or is it just equal in money, or is it equal in understanding and equal in both giving time? Because one person may feel that by paying for everything, that they're meeting their demands of, well, that is equality. I'm paying for everything. What else do you want? Where the other person might go, but you don't give me any of your time. You're not home at a decent hour where I can have an adult conversation for a change, and you're not home at a time when I can sit down and have dinner with another adult because I haven't spoke to an adult all day. And that's the equality of things as well. So I think it's about putting in place before you start some just basic ground rules of, like, well, if you're doing that and I'm doing that, this is my responsibility and that's your responsibility. Because sometimes those jobs get lost about whose job it is to do this and whose job it is to do that. I think it's a lot easier to change things once you've got something in place. But I'd love to hear from people that have been married for a long time and let me know, like, what has worked. Let other people know what's worked. People that might be listening to this thinking, well, what do people do that have been together happily for 50 years? And, are they still happy after 50 years or 10 years or 20 years, whichever that may be? So, feed back to us. Let us know. This is an open conversation, and they're subjects that we bring up because people want us to talk about them and to hear different points of view. And my point of view is just that. It's not advice. It can be you listening to someone that's got an opinion that might align with your own. But the best conversations sometimes are when your opinions don't align and you can both listen to something that you might go, actually, I never thought of it like that. A last question on today's podcast is, when should parents stop rescuing their adult children? Now, again, I think this is largely down to how you've been brought up yourself. And for me personally, the answer to that question is simple: never. They're always your children. Yes, you've got to make them stand on their own 2 feet. But me personally, as a father, I'll do anything that I can for my son, helping out, whether that be time, finance, whatever I've got. And I know, my parent, my mum, has massively helped me in my adult life later on when I've needed help. And that has been mostly financial. And without her, I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the stuff that I've done. And she was in a position where obviously she could help me out financially, and I was in a position where I could take it, and I needed it. So it's you try and pay it back as you do, not all of it, obviously, no, but you know. I think for me is if you've got the finances there or you've got the time, then of course you do it. I still pick my son up from the station when he's coming home from work, and I know I don't have to, and I know he can walk, and I know it's all the, but I just think, do you know what? If I can do it, why wouldn't I? Because it helps him out, and I think when you live with people as well, it is about helping them out. So that's a big part of it. I'm also aware of other people's relationship with their parents where they hardly see him. They might see him once a year, twice a year, and they haven't got that relationship of, talking often on the phone or once, whether it be once or twice a week, or, they might only see them once, twice a year. Now, to me, I find that very strange. But if they've been brought up like that, then to them that's the norm. So I think it's about how we've been brought up. Now, obviously, now for young people growing up, it's if they're living at home, which a lot of them are. My son still lives at home with me, but I say with me. Now the age he is, it's like having a roommate. So I don't see him as living at home with me. I see us just living together. So, but I don't want to take anything off of him. He does his fair share around the house, and we'll go out by the shopping and et cetera, et cetera. But I still like taking care of him. I feel like that's my purpose, in my life as a parent, that you're always going to take care of your kids. And my mum still looks to do that with me, and I'll look to always do it with Zach. And hopefully I'll pass that on to Zach when he has his kids eventually, hopefully, like I said, not until he's in his 40s. I think that'd be a great age for him to have kids. But it's about giving any help that you can to your kids. But I know, parents that are very strict, like, no, if they're living here, they're going to contribute, and they're going to contribute in this way, that way. Or, they need to be moving out by the time they're 25, 26, and getting their own house because that's what's good for them. And I think it's very different now. I think we realise now as adults looking at it now, I was brought up in a time when you were told, look, you need a house. You need a house, and, you need a mortgage. And, the financial advice has changed so much now, where I look at it and thinking, the last thing you need, mate, is a mortgage. You know, don't tie yourself down with a mortgage, either rent or buy to let, whatever it may be. But, do you still need a mortgage? I think it's changed a lot. And there is that tough love bit of like, no, you're 25 now, you're going out, you're buying your own house. I guess each to their own. But if I don't see what way that our kids at our ages now taking on financial burden is tough love. I just think it's a noose around their neck sometimes that they don't need. I think I've done enough of that in my life where I've got the house now, which is great, but I don't want my son to be burdened by those things. I think that burden was pushed on to my era. And yes, for some people it's really good, but for some people it hasn't worked out great at all. And it's not done them any favours whatsoever. So I think financially diversifying now is a much better option to our kids, like the young people, in what they're doing. And I think yes, it does give them independence if they can do that. But, like, so many people are renting now, are renting away and leaving the family home, and they can always go back to it as well. That's the other thing. But I think it's about not tying them down, where they can be fluid, especially with some of the jobs now. My son's job, he can work away, I think it's for 6 months of the year if he wants to. So he's been going off for little stints and living in different places. And I just think that's brilliant. I wish I could have done that. But I'm also glad that with my house, he can do that, because he can always, he just comes back again. So he goes off, rents somewhere for 3, 4 weeks, whatever it may be that he's there for, and then comes back. What a great life. And don't we want that for our kids? Don't we want our kids to have lives that were better than ours? I think that's what we look to strive for with our children. We want them to be happier than we were. And I don't mean that I wasn't happy. I just mean that I want him to have a better life than me, and I want his kids to have a better life than him, because you always want to strive, I guess, for more happiness, more enjoyment of what's around, and more seeing the world, and all those things that people can have. And I think by doing that, we're progressing all the time in terms of what we're giving each other and giving our kids. And I think finances have changed so much, and it's so expensive to live now. So why wouldn't you make it cheaper by staying at home and helping each other out? Surely that would be a good thing if you've got the space and you get on. That's the other thing. I'm very fortunate with my son. He's my best friend as well. And people go, your son can't be your best friend. Each to your own. If you've got a relationship relationship with your son where he's not your best friend and you've got other best friends, then that's fine. But for me, a best friend is the person that you're going to rely on, is the person that you know is going to be there if you need them. And for me, that would be my son. For other people, he wouldn't. They'd be like, "No, I can't come and do that for you because I'm out with my mates doing this." Where I would drop most stuff to help him out, and I think he'd drop most stuff to help me out. And that's the definition of a friend, I guess, someone that's always going to be there. So I guess it depends upon your relationship to whether or not that person is going to be there for you and it is going to be independent enough that they can come back and help you out when you need them. So I think this whole thing with should parents stop rescuing their adult children? No, I think if you can do it, then you do it. Like you would with any friend. If you could help a friend out, you'd help a friend out. If you find reasons that you're not going to help that friend out, then probably they're not a great friend to you anyway, or either that or they don't perceive you as being a great friend to them. So that's why they're not helping you out in the first place, which is fine. But that defines our friends as we get older, I think. You know, as we get older, it's harder to keep friends because it's a lot more work and you change as people and you change what you place as important. And also sometimes I think you've got to allow people to change because some people don't like you changing. It's like if they see you changing and you leave that little box they put you in, they don't like it. So that might be a change for them that they go, well, we're not going to be friends anymore. And vice versa, it works the same way. So on the whole thing of it's about what your boundaries are and how you place your importance on things with our children. It's like how much can you help them out and how much do you want to help them out? I think that would be, if I would give my son, my last penny, I'd sell the house for him if he needed it. But, luckily he doesn't. But I know that I would do that if I needed to because that's my priority. Some people that's not their priority. They're like, no, you go out, you earn your living now. This is my life, and I'm going to do this, and that's where we're all different. So that brings us to the end of today's podcast, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy the podcast. As always, give me your feedback. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow, make sure you share, and we'll catch up with you soon. Thank you again for listening to 50 Shades and Grey. Take care. Bye bye.